and welcome everyone. And I see we're coming from many parts of the country, but also from Fiji as well. And I'm not sure whether there's anything else, but people have put it in the chat. As we saw from that poll, most of our institutions are in fact committing to address research for grand challenges and the Sustainable Development Goals. Most of us think, and it certainly would be my view, that we could be doing more, but it's not just how much we're doing, it's what are the challenges that we face in committing to research the Sustainable Development Goals and these big societal challenges, and what are the capacities that we need in our institutions. And today we're going to explore some of those issues, because it's not easy, it's not simple. It does require a change in the way we do things. We were talking just before this about sort of traditional fly in, fly out methods of operation, which certainly is not going to contribute to solving these complex challenges. And the way we're going to work today, as Tal said, is we're going to start with two spotlight presentations, and they're from Dr. Stuart Minchin, who's the Director General of the Pacific Community based in MIA, and I'll be introducing Stuart more in a minute, and Dr. Tamantha Stutchbury, who is the Director of Research at the University of Wollongong's iAccelerate program. Stuart and Tam are going to speak for about 7 to 10 minutes each, and then we'll have a discussion, and hopefully we'll start to tackle some of these challenges and opportunities around research for sustainable development. If people want to make a comment or ask a question, just use the chat, or feel free to put up your hand and come into the discussion. This is not a formal webinar. It's meant to be more a discussion where everyone gets a chance to contribute. And after we've had that session with the two spotlights, we're going to break into breakout rooms to really give you an opportunity to talk with one another about what you're doing and any ideas you've got on how you could do it better. And Tal will coordinate that. So if we get started on our spotlights, and I think we might start with Stuart, since you're the furthest away. And as I said before, I love your shirt. I would do anything to be wearing a shirt like that now, and to be in Umea, but I'm not. But it's great we've got you here today. And as I said, you're the Director of SPC, the Pacific Community, and I think you'll tell us a bit about that and why that was set up. Before that, Stuart serves as the Chief of Environmental Geoscience Division of Geoscience Australia, which is a centre of expertise in the Australian Government for environmental earth science issues and the custodian of national environmental geoscience data. So it's interesting that I think from Stuart, we're going to get a perspective which isn't a university perspective, but it's a science perspective. So can I hand over to Stuart?
Thank you very much, John, and I'll just share my screen so that hopefully you're all able to see that. Okay, so I just wanted to start with a little bit of context first up, because when people think of the Pacific, they think of this kind of scenery, and in fact, you know, I've just joked about the beautiful weather that we're having here today, which is the reality for many places in the Pacific. But what a lot of people don't recognise, don't intuitively sense, is the deep development challenges that exist in the Pacific. In our region, only 40% of people have access to safe drinking water. Only 30% have access to basic sanitation in the region. This region is the most impacted by non-communicable diseases. Out of the top 10 countries for non-communicable disease burden, 7 of those top countries are from the Pacific. So there are huge development challenges in the region. Not everyone is sitting under a coconut tree sipping pina colada every day. This is not the reality that most Pacific Islanders experience. So SPC, the organisation that I work for, the Pacific Community, is the principal scientific and technical organisation in the Pacific. We are owned and governed by the 27 member countries and territories in the region, and we're active in over 25 sectors, and we've been around for 75 years. And we were founded in 1947 through an international treaty called the Canberra Agreement that really recognised a unique challenge in our region, and I'll just discuss that a little bit as I move to the next slide. So this is how we started off as the South Pacific Commission in 1947. We were formed effectively to recognise that in the Pacific context, where you have many island members, and they typically have very small land area. About 2% of the region is land, and 98% is water. Very small populations in many cases. That governments in our region, if the population is only maybe 2,000 people on the island, often the government is very small, the public service is consequently very small, and all of the functions that are expected of a modern government in terms of having healthcare, law and order, education, science, natural resource management and whatnot, has to be done by a very small number of people. Consequently, the traditional approaches to development that many people globally are used to when working in Africa or in Asia, where you come into a country and you develop that capability in the country itself on the ground, those traditional approaches don't actually work very well in the Pacific, because ultimately, if you're wanting to come in and develop expertise, for example, in fisheries science for one of these countries, you might fund the creation of a team, let's say 10 people that are focused on fisheries science. But as soon as that money finishes, there's no capacity to maintain that level of activity within that government anymore, and those people that have been trained up go and work somewhere else. There's no opportunity to keep that capability together, and so a lot of development activity in the region doesn't stick. So they developed SPC to be the home for the shared science and technology capability on behalf of all of those nations in the Pacific, that it did not make sense to create that capability in every one of the 22 Pacific Island countries and territories. So don't develop a science capability in fisheries science in Tuvalu and Kiribati and everything else. You put it in a regional organisation like SPC, where we can provide that service as an extension of government across the entire region. So this regional architecture was built up back in the 1940s and 50s, and it exists today. And in fact, if you want to do work in the Pacific in the science or research realm, you need to work with SPC or our sister organisations like SPREP, the Environment Program, who are these extended capabilities, if you like, of the countries themselves. And I can talk more about that as we move on. To give you an idea, we're the largest organisation in the Pacific. We have 650 employees in the Pacific community across many areas of science and technology. Our headquarters is here in Noumea. That's a picture in the background you can see of my office is down in the bottom left corner. We have offices in Suva, in Ponape, Port Vila, and field staff in many other Pacific Island sites, and we dual language English and French to recognise the different languages across the region. Our mission is to work for the well-being of Pacific people through effective and innovative application of science and knowledge, guided by a deep understanding of Pacific Island contexts and cultures. So this last bit is very important. There are many different cultures across this region. Understanding the value of traditional knowledge and how to integrate your science and technological understanding into that is very important. But we are effectively the shared science capability for the region. We're wholly owned and governed by our 27 members. each 2 years, we have a meeting of the ministerial level representation, and this is either prime ministers, presidents, or foreign ministers of the various countries. So at that level, we're guided whole of government sense, and every year we have an officials meeting that gives us our governance. So we're not just an NGO or an independent player in the region. We are directly connected. My board, I'm the CEO, my board is made up of the Prime Ministers and Presidents of all of the member countries and territories in the region. The smallest territory being Pitcairn Island, population of 50, and the largest being PNG with a population of around 8 million. So some real differences in the region. We do operate across a whole range of areas, and the breadth of what we touch on is important for people to realise, because we're not just, we don't focus on one area. This is just a summary of our divisional capabilities, but we're active in climate change research, environmental sustainability, education and educational quality assessment. So we run the NAPLAN process for all of the Pacific. For example, we are involved in curriculum development for the Year 7 and Year 12 curriculums across the region. Fisheries, aquaculture and marine ecosystems. So this is a big capability across the entire Pacific, underpinning the tuna fishery, for example, which I'll talk about in a minute. Geoscience, Energy and Maritime Division, renewable energy support for our members, geoscience, oceanography, human rights and social development, gender, youth issues and human rights, land resources, agriculture, public health, so this is clinical public health support, non-communicable diseases and others, and statistics, plus a whole range of integrated programs. What this means in the context of the SDGs is that we are the only organisation operating in our region that covers all of the SDGs. We have capabilities that underpin every one of the Sustainable Development Goals for our region. So you can think of us like a mini United Nations for the Pacific, if that helps to explain our role. So just a couple of very quick success stories, just to give you an idea of the sorts of things that we do. And the first one is tuna. A lot of people don't realise that 50% of the world's tuna comes from the Pacific. It's governed by this collection of these are the Forum Fisheries Agency members that are highlighted in red here that control access to the tuna fishery, but they do it with the science that SPC provides. So SPC does the tuna tagging cruises. We have a significant fisheries science capability, and all of the advice that those countries access on the tuna fishery and the science behind it comes from SPC. There was recent work done at the Glasgow COP, and we released a nature sustainability paper about the movement of tuna in response to climate change, for example, that has big impacts both for the GDPs in the region and for the fisheries sustainability in the longer term. What's interesting, if you look globally, this is the Pacific in the big green column. We are the only tuna fishery in the world where all 4 of the stocks that are extracted are assessed as being sustainably managed. And that's because of this unique combination of policy and science being formulated to direct into that. So second example, success story, was the recent COVID crisis. This is just to show the value of the connection in the region. So SPC had already, before COVID came along, we'd already invested in giving every one of our member countries access to these gene expert machines for tuberculosis testing. And when COVID came along, we approached the manufacturer of these machines to see if they could create a COVID test using these cartridges, and they were able to do that within a matter of weeks. We were able to order those cartridges into the Pacific. This was before borders were shut, and just as borders were shutting, we were able to get that testing capability into the Pacific quickly. And in fact, those test kits ended up being sent to Africa and South America and elsewhere. But it was SPC that requested that test kit be made available rapidly, and the company responded. We were then able to, with Australian aid support and a whole bunch of other support from New Zealand and elsewhere, to get those test kits to each of the countries. So they actually had the capability to test for COVID well before the first cases actually arrived in the region. We also did a bunch of training of nurses and intensive care professionals in the region for how to deal with the first cases of COVID when they arrived, and we did a whole bunch of work on translating instructions for personal protective equipment and whatnot into local languages across the region. So the Pacific was the best prepared and has been the least impacted in terms of total numbers by COVID in terms of world regions, and it was because of this preparedness and capability that existed. So they're two examples where the work that we do, the underpinning work in 2 of the SDGs, has incredible impact in the Pacific, and it really requires this close connection between an organisation like SPC that has these ongoing capabilities and an understanding of the context to apply the research that is being produced by people elsewhere in the world to have impact in this region. So I'll pause there and pass back to you, John. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Stuart. And we'll come back and have some more discussion and questions about that. But if I could now ask Dr. Tamantha Stutchbury to speak to us. And as I said, Tam is the Director of Research at the University of Wollongong's iAccelerate program, which is a business incubator committed to helping small-scale businesses build up and have a positive impact on the region and the world. Previously, Tam was the Program Director for the Global Challenges Program, and you may refer a bit to that in your address, I'm sure, and was responsible for growing that program and its networks. So Tam, great to hear from you.
Great, thank you. Thanks so much. Let me share my slides. This should be seamless now, shouldn't it, after all that? Can I get a thumbs up if that's working? That's awesome. Great. Thank you so much. And thank you so much, Tal and John and SDSN for letting me speak today. It's a real honour and privilege. And I'm speaking to you today from Dharawal country. And I just want to pay my respect to elders past and present and acknowledge any First Nations people that might be listening into my talk today. Stuart's talk is amazing. I'm going to take it from a huge region now just back to one university and what we've been doing towards addressing the UN Sustainable Development Goals here at UOW. So the University of Wollongong is wholly committed to the Sustainable Development Goals and integrating them in all that we do. But like all organisations, big and small, this has been a journey. And at University of Wollongong, research was one of the initial areas that embraced the Sustainable Development Goals and ended up being a key driver for change that spread from research out across the university. So over the next few slides, and I promise there's only a few, I'm just going to take you through that journey with a bit of a research lens on, but also highlight some other key milestones that we've achieved as a whole of institution. So important about the integration of the Sustainable Development Goals is knowing a little bit more about the University of Wollongong. And, you know, every uni has these slides that sort of summarise some of their key facts and selling points. But to summarise this, we're research intensive. We're at a scale that's big enough to have real research impact, but small enough to be really highly connected. So we're connected not only with researchers amongst our campuses, but also between our Wollongong campus, our innovation campus, our regional campuses and our global campuses. And so we're a highly connected workforce to each other and to our community. And UOW is one of the primary employers in our region. So it used to be BHP. At the moment, it would be healthcare and hospitality, but then the university comes in right behind that. And so the interconnectedness between people and place has been really important from my point of view in why we've managed to have such amazing impact in addressing the Sustainable Development Goals. So the timeline for engagement started at a faculty level, and I think Dr. Belinda Gibbons, who was a real driver for Sustainable Development Goals, is on here somewhere today, and she's amazing and behind a lot of these initiatives here. So back in 2007, the Faculty of Business became a signatory to the United Nations Prime Network, with the aim of ensuring that their business students graduated with an understanding and an ability to deliver change for sustainable development. So that happened long before I came on scene and really started implanting the dedication to sustainability at the University of Wollongong. So if you fast forward to 2013, UOW launched a whole of university strategic challenge-led interdisciplinary research program called the Global Challenges Program. And I was really lucky enough to be the second person appointed to the program and to the program of the Global Challenges Program for 8 years. So whilst the development of this program and the launch actually predated the Sustainable Development Goals that we're talking about now, it ended up being a really critical factor for engaging researchers in sustainable development. So in 2012, whilst the world, we were looking at the Sustainable Development Goals, at Wollongong, we were looking at a thing called the Global Challenges Program. So at its core, there was a small number of research challenges. But key to the success of the Global Challenges Program in changing research culture and contributing to the Sustainable Development Goals were an approach and a core set of values that were different to what we'd ever seen before at our university. So to just give you a little bit of an overview, we were a small team. So we had one academic lead for each of the challenge, and they were part-time positions. We had myself and 2 support staff when we started out, but we were given significant funding internally that we allocated. So from the start, it was a couple of $100,000 we would give out. By the end, we could hand out, over the course of a year, nearly $1 million of research funding. So real money that was given to researchers to address the challenges. And we had a stage-gated approach. So most people would start off at our smaller funding schemes and then grow and develop through them. So they might have started off getting $15,000, but by year 3 or 4, they might have been getting $100,000 or $200,000. And when they were getting those bigger amounts of money, they had to have true and lasting partnerships with their stakeholders and with each other. And so we invested the time to grow projects over a period of time. Some other really important things about the program was that, unlike a lot of these other programs that you see, it wasn't just marketing. So there were real people on the ground and real money to be allocated, but also the university as a whole decided what the challenges for the program were. So these weren't dictated to them. There was a 6 to 12 month working group with consultation where the university community decided what challenges they wanted to accept. The challenges had to align with local need, global need, and the research capacity at the University of Wollongong. And they ended up being living well longer, sustaining coastal and marine zones, manufacturing innovation, and they were all drawn together under an overarching theme of transforming lives and regions. We strictly only funded projects that truly address these challenges and that were truly interdisciplinary. We made people walk out of their corridors and across campus to meet people with other disciplines that also wanted to address these challenges. We gave teams time, resources, support for projects to thrive, evolve, and sometimes fail. But at our core, we were totally inflexible when it came to diversity, equity, and supporting the next generation of research leaders. If we had an application from 4 senior male professors, we would not fund it. They had to go back and they had to embrace our principles in their projects. So at the inception, some of the things that Global Challenges did to support the Sustainable Development Goals was actually to fund researchers like Belinda and her colleagues that were working on Sustainable Development Goals. And we also provided some funding to the start of the Global Climate Change Week events that have now grown into an amazing big annual event. By 2017, we were integrating the Sustainable Development Goals in all that we did. Our researchers were able to access training on them, and they were aware of which SDGs they were addressing. we started mapping all of our active projects against which sustainable goals they were working on. And you can see here a picture that was made when we probably had about 80 projects that mapped which goals they were working to. And at a practical level, we're integrating sustainable development goals into our applications forms, our reporting forms. And we started tagging projects, media, and building awareness against sustainable development goals within the global challenges sphere. From global challenges, it then integrated more broadly to all research projects across UOW. And this is an example of when we pull researchers together to track their impact. So this came along with the ARC Impact and Engagement tool. Everyone in Australia was looking at impact. We fully integrated the Sustainable Development Goals at the same time. And we could capture in not only our impact tracking software, but also we were aligning all of our grants and publications to Sustainable Development Goals. Dr. Belinda Gibbons would come across to these sessions and train researchers and introduce them to Sustainable Development Goals. And then the connecting of Sustainable Development Goals to research in the back end grew from there. So all of our impact tracking, all of our publications, people's profiles, web pages, media, and reporting all started connecting to the Sustainable Development Goals. And so all researchers across the campus were talking to a common language. From traditional research projects, the integration of Sustainable Development Goals expanded across the whole research and innovation division. So I'm now the Director of Research at iAccelerate, and I'm pleased to say that many years before I came over here, Belinda had worked to develop an SDG model for all of our startups. So when all of our startups come and join our accelerator program, the first course they do is on Sustainable Development Goals. And by connecting our researchers, our companies to Sustainable Development Goals, it allowed them to focus on what impact did they want, what sort of company did they want, not only what was going to be their business model and how they were going to make money, but what sort of impact and sustainability did they want to have in the world. And the other really cool thing about this is it allowed the startups in the incubator to talk the common language to the researchers with the Sustainable Development Goals as a connector, and then also talk to our community. And so by connecting everything to the Sustainable Development Goals, we were all talking a common language. So as you go along the timeline here, we joined Prime, then Global Challenges, SDGs launched, we funded some global Sustainable Development Goals, and we all move across to 2019 when we joined the SDSN and signed the declaration and commitment to the Sustainable Development Goals at the university. And that was like a really significant moment for a small group of us that have been advocating very hard to make that happen. And then we also decided to commit to the Times Higher Ed rankings, the pilot. And so UOW committed in the pilot and actually submitted something against every SDG. So as you know, you didn't have to submit against every SDG, and there were some that we weren't actually achieving that strongly against. And as a working group that was pulling that submission together, we advocated very hard to submit against every Sustainable Development Goal so that a line in the sand was drawn and we could communicate where we weren't doing well so that we could move on and do better and keep improving. So that's where it started in research. And then of course it spreads like a whole community. So for 2019, Global Challenges led the production of our first Sustainable Development Goal report. And it was done with a handful of people that pulled that together. And from there, Sustainable Development Goals started mapping into everything the university did. So we were mapping all of our undergraduate subjects to it. Some of our students led the Youth Climate Statement. We had international conferences that were around Sustainable Development Goal themes. And we continued to submit to the Times Higher Ed each year. And last year, the university established a Sustainable Futures Committee that, with 5 working groups, has 40 key people across the campus working holistically to integrate the Sustainable Development Goals and sustainability in all aspects of our teaching, research, community engagement, and operations. The Sustainable Development Goals are also fully integrated into UOW's strategic plan. And whilst rankings do matter, and we do continue to submit to Times Higher Ed, and this is our results from this year, I think what's really more important to me is what impact that we're making broadly. We had a discussion before we opened the doors for everyone to come in, and I do see values in rankings and making universities pay attention. But I think what's much more important are the actions. And over the weekend, UOW committed to carbon neutrality by 2030. And I think this is important not only about the real impact that this will have, but in an industrial region that's transforming, that lives on the coast. By UOW standing up and making this statement, it's also a beacon of what we can achieve in this region. And I think that's way more exciting to me than any ranking number that would come out. So yeah, that's me. And thank you all for listening.